What if we told you that one of the most beloved comedic actresses of classic television carried a secret? Not of scandal, but of quiet, tender rebellion. Nancy Kulp, best remembered as the sharp-tongued Miss Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies, lived a life off-screen filled with hidden romances. In this video, we uncover the names and stories of the lesbian actresses Nancy Kulp is rumored to have loved. Don't miss a moment. Nancy Kulp was no ordinary actress. She wasn't the dazzling bombshell or sultry songstress. She was the quietly brilliant woman in the corner, the one with the sharp wit, towering intellect, and magnetic presence. Born in 1921 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, she was educated, patriotic, and principled. With a master's degree in English and French and a stint as a Navy officer during World War II, Nancy entered Hollywood not through beauty pageants, but through brains. And she brought a different kind of sophistication to the screen. Most know her as Miss Jane Hathaway, the no-nonsense secretary in the Beverly Hillbillies, a role she played with such comedic precision that it earned her an Emmy nomination. But beneath her on-screen restraint was a deeply private life, one few truly knew. Nancy Kulp never remarried after divorcing Charles Malcolm Dacus in 1961. What many didn't realize was that from the late 1950s onward, her heart may have belonged not to another man, but to a series of women whose names still glitter in Hollywood's constellation. In the world of hidden lounges, coded glances, and secret getaways, Nancy Kulp's story unfolds as one of forbidden affection and extraordinary courage. Talullah Bankhead. Among the names whispered behind velvet curtains is that of Talullah Bankhead, the tempest in a teacup, the southern siren with a voice like gravel and the appetite of a hurricane. Bankhead was known not just for her captivating performances on Broadway and in Lifeboat, but for her voracious and unapologetic sexuality. She didn't hide her eccentricities. She flaunted them like a mink coat. But even Talullah had to play the Hollywood game. Though rumored affairs with women like Billie Holiday and Marlene Dietrich peppered the gossip columns, real confirmation was scarce. That's what makes her rumored connection with Nancy Kulp so fascinating. Where Bankhead was wild and unpredictable, Kulp was composed, intellectual, almost serene. According to those close to Kulp, their relationship began at a private party hosted by a mutual friend, an off-record gathering of intellectuals, actresses, and misfits. Bankhead was reportedly smitten by Kulp's brain more than her beauty, enchanted by the depth of her conversation rather than by flirtation. Their liaison was short-lived but passionate, lived in shadows and whispered rendezvous. Talullah would later joke to friends about the tall thinker who tamed the beast. Kulp never responded publicly, but in private letters, now long lost but referenced in biographical research, she mentioned a woman of fire and chaos who taught me to feel without shame. In many ways, their secret romance symbolized the very dilemma of the era. Boldness always cloaked in discretion. Nancy was too careful to let the world know. But Talullah, she was the only woman Kulp ever allowed to make her feel reckless. Marlene Dietrich. If Talullah was a firestorm, Marlene Dietrich was a slow-burning candle in the fog. German-born, gender-defying, and effortlessly glamorous, Dietrich was already an international symbol of sexual fluidity. Her tuxedos, her husky voice, her knowing smirk. They didn't just captivate audiences, they challenged norms. And she was rumored to have lovers across both genders, continents, and cultures. But Marlene Dietrich wasn't reckless with her secrets. She kept a tight inner circle, and according to LGBTQ historians and memoirists who interviewed Kulp's confidants, Nancy was part of that very circle. They met in the early 1960s at a charity event in Los Angeles, where Kulp had been invited as a guest of honor. Marlene, then in her late 50s, was reportedly taken with Kulp's quiet charisma. They began corresponding, a few typed letters, some handwritten notes, and eventually Dietrich invited Kulp to one of her private gatherings in Paris. Their connection was described as intellectual intimacy laced with flirtation. Friends speculated that theirs was more emotional than physical, a bond of two women who found solace in each other's silence. But rumors persisted that Dietrich arranged for Kulp to stay with her in a discreet villa during one of her off-tour seasons. A place where they could live not as legends, but simply as women, free from performance. In one surviving anecdote from a former Hollywood costumer, Marlene was once seen brushing a strand of hair from Nancy's cheek at a backstage gala. A small, intimate gesture unnoticed by most, but unmistakably tender. Kulp never confirmed the relationship, but when asked in a later interview who she most admired in the business, she simply smiled and said, "The women who could charm a room without saying a word." For many, that was a quiet nod to Marlene. Joan Crawford. Few names in Hollywood evoke more mystique than Joan Crawford. Known for her striking eyes, fierce ambition, and unforgettable roles in Mildred Pierce, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? And humoresque, Crawford projected strength, elegance, and control. But behind the sharp cheekbones and rehearsed poise was a life rife with contradictions and emotional complexities. Rumors of Joan Crawford's affairs with women have existed for decades, fueled by industry gossip, personal letters, and unverified biographies. She was married 4 times to men, yet those close to her often whispered about her emotional liaisons with actresses, maids, and dancers. Nancy Kulp, according to at least 2 Hollywood insiders, was one such woman. Their alleged connection began on the set of a charity telethon in the early 1960s, where Crawford found herself charmed by Kulp's articulate academic air. Kulp, on the other hand, was captivated by Crawford's powerful presence and vulnerability behind the scenes. They reportedly shared a brief but emotionally charged connection, a series of dinners, shared walks through studio backlots, and long conversations over whiskey and scripts. Crawford was meticulous about secrecy. She lived with the dual pressures of being a symbol of heterosexual desire while managing deep personal insecurities about her own identity. Kulp never publicly commented on Crawford, but in private writings revealed posthumously, she once referred to a woman of frost and fire, capable of cruelty, but capable of tenderness too, when no one was watching. That description, many believe, belonged to Joan. Their relationship, if it indeed existed, may have ended before it truly began. Crawford could not allow vulnerability to interfere with her carefully curated myth. And Kulp, ever the realist, walked away before her heart got too involved. But even in its brevity, the connection left a mark, a hidden chapter in the lives of 2 very different women, bound by a shared need to love in silence. Barbara Stanwyck. Of all the rumored relationships Nancy Kulp may have had, none carried more weight or heartbreak than her alleged romance with Barbara Stanwyck. The queen of noir, the empress of restraint, the woman who could say more with a glance than others could with a monologue. Stanwyck's reputation was that of a consummate professional. Films like Double Indemnity, Stella Dallas, and The Lady Eve showcased her range, from hard-boiled femme fatale to maternal protector. Yet off-screen, Stanwyck remained intensely private. She divorced actor Robert Taylor in 1952 and never remarried. And while she maintained friendships with a tight circle of actresses, whispers long surrounded her preference for the company of women. According to those in Kulp's inner circle, the 2 met in the late 1950s through a shared literary salon hosted by a former screenwriter. Both women had a love for poetry, and their bond began not with flirtation, but with conversation. Pages of Yeats, letters of Woolf, and slow evenings spent reading aloud. Their relationship was described as deeply intellectual, cautiously romantic, and heartbreakingly constrained. They took discreet trips to Palm Springs and Northern California under the guise of professional retreats. On the surface, they were simply 2 actresses seeking rest, but behind closed doors, they were something more. A former makeup artist on one of Stanwyck's late 1950s films recalled seeing the pair exchange a glance across a quiet set. Not longing, not lust, but familiarity. The kind of look 2 people give when they've seen each other at their most unguarded. Nancy Kulp never spoke Stanwyck's name in public, but when once asked if she'd ever experienced real love, she answered, "Yes, but it didn't belong to the world, and that was the only way it could survive." Friends confirmed she was referring to Barbara. Their love was the kind that lives in shadows, rich, sacred, and profoundly sad. And perhaps that's why it lasted in Kulp's heart far longer than anyone ever knew. The studio era was a glittering golden cage. Women like Kulp, Crawford, Bankhead, and Stanwyck were expected to live in rigid roles defined by the scripts they played and the images their studios crafted. But beneath the veneer of glamour was an underground world, a quiet network of queer artists who found each other in the spaces between fame. Nancy Kulp was part of that secret society, a community of trust, discretion, and coded language. According to one of her surviving colleagues, there were private parties in Laurel Canyon, women-only poetry readings in Brentwood, and silent drives along the Pacific Coast Highway where hands touched just out of view. These weren't casual flings or salacious affairs. They were efforts to preserve the most human need of all, connection. Nancy's relationships weren't trophies or tabloid fodder. They were sanctuaries, moments of escape from a world that insisted they be someone else. Kulp dated other women, lesser-known stage actresses and radio voices now lost to time. And each relationship, no matter how brief, helped her carve a life outside the frame, a personal narrative beyond the sitcom laugh track. Her emotional courage helped other actresses see that love, though hidden, was still love. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended in 1971, Nancy Kulp didn't chase the spotlight like many of her peers. Instead, she stepped away, not in defeat, but with intention. She moved to a farm in Connecticut for a time, later settling in Palm Springs, California. There, amid desert winds and blooming hibiscus, she found peace in a community that was quietly becoming a haven for Hollywood's queer elite. Kulp's later years weren't defined by scandal or confession. She didn't write a tell-all or sit for primetime interviews, but she did speak at women's colleges, support LGBTQ-friendly charities, and advocate for animal welfare with disarming sincerity. To the public, she was Miss Hathaway, buttoned up, brainy, and loyal. But in her quiet retirement, she was simply Nancy, a woman who had loved deeply, privately, and without apology. According to accounts from friends and students she mentored, Kulp never regretted her decision to live discreetly. She acknowledged the weight of secrecy, but celebrated the richness of her experiences. "You can't always choose the world you live in," she once told a young actress during a theater workshop, "but you can choose how you love inside it." In 1990, Nancy Kulp was diagnosed with cancer, a cruel twist for a woman who had lived so carefully and given so much. The disease progressed quickly despite chemotherapy, and she passed away just 1 year later in Palm Desert, California, at the age of 69. Even in her final months, Kulp remained dignified. She never issued public statements about her illness, her past, or her lovers. But in private, she reportedly made peace with the life she had lived and the love stories she had never been able to share out loud. One close friend recalls that Kulp spent her final days listening to classical music, surrounded by books and photographs of friends, both famous and forgotten. She kept letters from a few beautiful women, the friend revealed, though the names were never spoken. When she was laid to rest in Mifflintown, Pennsylvania, it was with little fanfare. No camera crews, no red carpet, just family, a few trusted friends, and the wind whispering through old trees. A fitting end for a woman who had always preferred the truth in shadows to the lies in light. Nancy Kulp never shouted her truth, but she didn't deny it either. She lived at a time when to be openly lesbian in Hollywood could mean the end of everything: your career, your reputation, your safety. She saw what happened to others who dared to step too far outside the system's lines, and she chose another path. A quieter rebellion, a hidden truth. But that doesn't make her any less of a pioneer. Through whispered glances with Talullah Bankhead, intimate letters with Marlene Dietrich, secret rendezvous with Barbara Stanwyck, and emotional connections with Joan Crawford, Nancy Kulp lived love in the shadows, and in doing so, she helped carve a space for future generations to live it in the light. Her story isn't just about who she dated, it's about what it means to hold on to love when the world says it's wrong. It's about resilience, intelligence, dignity, and the strength to live a double life with grace. In an industry built on illusion, Nancy Kulp was one of the rare few who kept something real. Nancy Kulp may never have stepped onto a stage to declare her love out loud, but her legacy speaks volumes in silence. Her secret relationships with Hollywood's most legendary women form a quiet, powerful chapter in queer history. If her story moved you, subscribe for more untold truths from classic Hollywood's hidden corners. Your curiosity keeps history alive.